Wyoming Territory, January 1883, the wind tore through the high plains like it had a grudge. Snow came sideways, stinging like grit, burying fence posts and shuttering windows. Garrett Rowen pulled his coat tighter as he rode into the small, half-abandoned town of Larkspur Hollow. His horse, Boone, snorted steam into the cold. Garrett leaned forward and patted his neck. "We will not stay long," he muttered, voice rough from the ride. "Just need supplies." He had not expected to find anyone outside, not in this cold. But as he passed the old mercantile, its windows cracked and doors shut tight, he caught sight of something on the porch. A shape, hunched and still, his brow furrowed. He slowed Boone and dismounted, boots crunching through ice. As he climbed the steps, he saw what it was, a woman. She was curled against the wall, wrapped in thin, torn cloth that might have once been a dress. Her bare feet were red and raw. Snow clung to her hair and her lips were nearly blue. But her chest rose, shallow and slow. Garrett dropped to one knee beside her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and careful. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. Pale gray like river stone, they barely focused. He did not think. He just moved. He slid his arms under her, lifting her with care. She was so light it unnerved him. "You're safe now," he said, his voice firm as he pulled her close to his chest, shielding her from the wind. "I've got you." She did not speak, but her fingers twitched against his coat. Garrett moved fast. He tied Boone to the rail, kicked open the door of the mercantile, which had been empty for months, and carried her inside. The place still had a potbelly stove in the corner. He set her down on a pile of old wool blankets and lit the fire with the flint in his saddlebag. She lay still, but her eyes stayed open, watching him. He knelt beside her again. "What is your name?" She blinked slowly, then whispered, "Willa." Her voice was rough, like it had not been used in days. "I am Garrett Rowen," he said. "I am going to take care of you. You warm up here. I will get more firewood." She did not answer, but her eyes followed him. He worked fast, moving like a man with a purpose. He found some old crates and split them down with his belt knife. By the time he had a steady fire going, he saw color returning to her cheeks. He pulled his extra coat from the saddlebag and draped it over her. "It will scratch," he warned. "Wool always does." "I do not care," she murmured. "It is warm." He crouched down and met her eyes. "How long were you out there?" Her face twisted slightly, like the question hurt. "3 nights, I think. You could have died." "I know." Garrett stood up and paced. He had no idea what to do with this. He was not used to people. He kept to himself. His ranch was 5 miles out, tucked between the hills. He liked it that way, quiet, predictable. This was not any of those things. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded just once. He pulled dried meat from his saddlebag and set it beside her. "Slow, take it slow." She chewed like her jaw ached. He watched, trying not to look like he was watching. After a while, she whispered, "Thank you." "You have somewhere to go?" She shook her head. "No family." Her eyes flicked away. "Not anymore." He did not press. Something in her voice made it clear she would not talk about that yet. A long silence settled between them. The fire cracked. Snow tapped at the windows. Garrett finally said, "You cannot stay here. This place is not safe." "I know." "You will come with me," he said. "Just until you are strong. My ranch is quiet, no one around." Her eyes widened just a little. "You do not have to be afraid," he said. "I give you my word, you will be safe." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "All right." He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. They rode out at first light. He wrapped her in every coat and blanket he had. She sat behind him on Boone, arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. She did not speak, but he felt her hold tighten when the wind howled. By the time they reached his ranch, the clouds had cleared. The sun broke through, lighting the snow-covered hills in gold. He helped her down and led her into the cabin. It was small but warm. He kept it clean. A fire was already going in the hearth from the kindling he had left burning in the iron stove. He set her by it, brought her water, then pointed to the cot in the corner. "You rest," he said. "I will take the floor." "You do not have to do all this," she whispered. "I know I do not," he said, "but I want to." She watched him for a long moment, then she lay down and closed her eyes. That night, as the wind shrieked outside and the fire glowed low, he sat by the stove watching over her. She had nearly died out there, and he had found her in rags, on a cold porch, and somehow that felt like something more than just coincidence. It felt like the beginning of something. Willa's body had begun to heal faster than her mind. By the end of her first week on Garrett's ranch, the bruises on her arms had faded to yellow, and the rawness in her palms had turned to tight skin. But she still startled when the wind knocked a shutter loose, or when Boone's hooves thudded too close to the porch. Garrett never asked about it. He just fixed the shutter and tied Boone farther out. Late one morning, she stepped outside alone for the first time. The sun was high, and the slope behind the cabin gleamed with untouched snow. Garrett was working at the fence line, sleeves rolled and hat low. She watched him pause, lean into a post, and pull the wire taut with steady hands. He noticed her not by sound, but by something else, some shift in the air maybe. He turned and met her gaze across the clearing. She didn't look away this time. "You feelin' strong enough to walk the ridge?" he called. She nodded once. "I think so." He waited while she stepped into the boots he'd left by the door, too big but warm. They walked side by side, slow at first, then steadier once her legs remembered how. The trail behind the barn curved upward to the hill where the land opened wide. From the top, the valley buckled into drowsy winter folds. Pines clung to the north slope, and the pale sky stretched clear as far as Montana. Garrett rested his hands on his hips and looked out. "That's the Tongue River, just beyond that rise. You can't see it from here, but it's there. Frozen solid this time of year." Willa studied the horizon. "It's quiet," he nodded. "That's why I stayed." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Where were you before?" "Texas Panhandle. Drove cattle till the war ended, then I drifted north." Her eyes flicked toward him. "You fought." "My older brother did. I was 16 when it started, helped on drives and buried too many men younger than I was by the end." She didn't answer, but her jaw tensed. Garrett glanced at her, then looked away. "You don't have to say anything about what brought you here. I figure when you're ready you'll decide whether it matters." She surprised him by speaking. It was a marriage. Her voice was soft but steady, short, long enough to leave marks. He watched her fingers clench around her sleeves, then release. "You left him?" "No." Her mouth twisted, but not in bitterness. "He died. Fever took him. I was already planning to run." Garrett didn't speak. The wind moved across the grass below, dry and restless. She turned toward him. "I thought maybe I'd go east, but I didn't make it far. Got robbed in Rawlins. Lost everything but the dress I wore." His eyes stayed on hers. "And you ended up in Larkspur Hollow." "I was looking for shelter. Found a locked door." Garrett looked away, jaw tight. "That town should have burned itself out years ago." They stood in silence, the kind that doesn't need smoothing over. Willa shifted her weight. "What made you stop?" "That day." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know. I just looked at you and knew if I rode on, I'd regret it the rest of my life." She blinked, not expecting that. He turned to her. "You want to stay longer than just till you're strong?" Her breath caught. "I don't know." "That's all right. You can take your time." She nodded slowly. "I'd like to help, though, around the place." He gave a short nod. "There's always work. You'll need better boots." Her mouth curled slightly. "So I don't fall into the river." He gave a quiet laugh. "That'd be a cold way to go." They walked back down the hill together, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The sun slipped westward, and the shadows stretched long across the yard. Garrett opened the barn door and handed her a small rake. "If you're set on helping, start with the coop. Hens don't care about sorrow, just warm straw and feed." She took it from him. "I can manage that." He watched her step into the dim barn light, shoulders square. Inside, the fire still burned low. The air smelled of pine smoke and horses, earth and something warmer now. A rhythm had begun, not quite a life yet, but the shape of one. And neither of them said it, but both knew they were no longer strangers. The snow began to melt in the third week of February, slow and steady, like the land itself was stretching out of sleep. Mud sucked at the edges of the yard, and the creek behind the barn cracked and groaned beneath its thinning ice. Willa rolled up her sleeves and scrubbed the hearthstones while Garrett hauled feed from the shed. Neither of them said much during the day, but the silence between them had shifted. It no longer pressed, it held. One morning, Garrett reached for his coat, then paused at the door, heading to the line cabin. Elk been nosing the fence, might have broken through. Willa straightened from the basin. "How far?" "Couple miles west. Ridge trail's clear enough now. I'll be back before dusk." She dried her hands on her skirt. "You want company?" He looked at her a moment, then nodded. "If you're sure of your footing, I'm sure." They saddled Boone and a smaller mare named Hazel. The air still held a bite, but it was softer than it had been. Willa's cheeks colored as they rode, her eyes following the thawed edge of the trees. They reached the cabin by noon. It sat in a shallow dip where the pines thinned. The door hung crooked, and a crow flapped up from the roof as they dismounted. Garrett crouched near the fence, inspecting a splintered post. Willa walked the perimeter, her boots sinking where the snow had gone to slush. "Something heavy came through here," she said. Garrett ran a hand along the wire. "Bull elk, most likely. Might circle back." Willa glanced toward the tree line. "Do you keep a rifle here in the loft, just in case?" He climbed the steps to the porch and pulled the door open. The cabin smelled of old pine and dust. Willa followed him in, brushing her fingers along the low beams. "It's warmer than I thought," she said. "South-facing. Holds heat better." She looked around. A tin cup hung from a nail, and a folded blanket lay on the bunk, stiff with age. It wasn't much, but it felt like it had held shelter more than once. Garrett stood by the window, watching the trees. "You used to come here often?" she asked. "Last spring," he said. "When the cattle calved and I needed to stay close." She moved beside him, eyes on the same stretch of woods. "I never stayed anywhere long enough to leave anything behind." Garrett turned to her. "You could." The words came quiet but not uncertain. Willa didn't answer right away. She stepped back and picked up the tin cup, turning it in her hands. Then she looked at him. "Most men pick up strays out of guilt or pity. I didn't." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder." Garrett didn't move. "You think I want something from you?" "No," she said. "That's what makes it harder, too." They stood in the doorway of a place meant for waiting out storms. The light shifted across the floor as the clouds thinned. Garrett spoke without looking at her. "I don't expect anything, Willa, but I don't regret stopping, not for a second." She set the cup down and stepped outside. The wind tugged at her braid and she breathed in deep. "I don't trust easily," she said, "I know. But I'm learning." He joined her. "What helps?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "When someone stays exactly who they said they were." Garrett gave a small nod. "I can manage that." They rode back slower, letting the horses pick their way over the softening trail. At the bend above the ravine, Willa reined in and looked back toward the ridge. "That cabin." She began, then hesitated. "What about it?" It felt like a place folks could start over, if they wanted. Garrett kept his eyes ahead. "That's the kind of place I meant to build." Willa looked at him, her voice quieter now. "Maybe you already did." He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers where the reins hung loose between them, and she didn't pull away. They rode the rest of the way side by side, the space between them warm and certain. Inside the cabin that night, she stirred Stu while he mended a strap by lamplight. The quiet was easy, familiar. And though neither said it aloud, something had shifted again, not sudden, not final, but sure as the turning of the season. By mid-March, the earth had begun to soften beneath the snowmelt, and the days stretched longer. The creek behind the cabin ran quick and loud now, and Willa had started rising before the sun to tend the coop without needing to ask. She moved with quiet purpose, her shoulders straighter, her gait no longer careful. Garrett noticed it, but didn't speak on it. He split logs in the yard while she fetched water from the stream, and their paths crossed and overlapped in the rhythm of shared work. Some days passed without more than a few words between them, but nothing about it felt distant. One afternoon, Garrett returned from the far pasture with a saddlebag full of mail and supplies. "Stopped by the freight station," he said, setting the bundle on the table. "Figured the snow wouldn't hold me back this time." Willa unwrapped the newspaper first, her fingers pausing over the headline. "There was a fire in Cheyenne," she said, scanning the ink-stained page. "A hotel, I think. Dozens gone." He leaned against the doorframe, wiping his hands. Too many buildings stacked close. Dry timbers, no proper pumps. She folded the paper, her mouth tight. "I stayed in a place like that once. Didn't sleep the whole night. Kept watching the lamp shadows on the wall." Garrett studied her a moment. "You ever think of going back east?" Her eyes stayed on the folded paper. "I used to, when the nights were the worst. I'd imagine some quiet town with blue curtains in the windows and someone who didn't know my name." He didn't move. "And now, I don't imagine it anymore," she said. "Not since I started sleeping through the wind." Garrett nodded once, then crossed the room and pulled a narrow box from the bottom of the sack. "This came for you." He slid it across the table. She looked at it warily. "For me, addressed to your name." "Jackson from the station said a man rode in last week and left it without a word. Paid in coin." Her fingers hovered above the lid. Then she opened it. Inside lay a worn brooch, its silver frame dulled with age. A carved violet was set in the center, the enamel chipped at one edge. Willa's breath hitched. "I thought this was lost," she whispered. Garrett didn't ask how she'd come by it. He only said, "You know the man?" She nodded slowly. "My brother. He left before the marriage, said he'd send for me once he found steady work. I never heard from him again. You think he's still looking?" "I think he found out too late," she said, "and sent what he could." Garrett rested his hand on the edge of the table. "You want to write him?" She shook her head. "There's nothing to say." "Not anymore." He stepped back, giving her space. The afternoon light cut through the window, brushing her hair in gold. She closed the box and set it aside. Later, she joined him in the barn while he checked the calf stalls. The youngest had been born 2 nights before, a little red heifer still unsteady on its legs. Willa knelt beside her, brushing straw from the tiny shoulder. "She needs a name," she said softly. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "You naming livestock now?" She made it through a hard night. "That's worth naming." He leaned on the stall gate. "What do you have in mind?" "Juniper," she said. "It's the only green thing I've seen since December." He nodded. "Juniper, then." They stood in the barn until the light faded to blue. Outside, the wind had calmed and a pale crescent moon rose above the trees. When they turned back toward the cabin, Willa touched his arm lightly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not asking me to be someone new, just letting me be. Here." Garrett covered her hand with his. "That's all I ever meant to do." She didn't pull away. Inside, the fire had burned low, but neither of them moved to stoke it. They sat close, knees nearly touching, the quiet between them no longer something to fill but something to share. And though no promises were made, something in her gaze said she'd begun to believe in the steadiness of things. In him. In this place. In the life that might follow. By early April, the frost had pulled back from the roots, and birdsong returned to the trees above the cabin. The days were longer now, filled with purpose. Willa had taken to riding Hazel out past the creek in the mornings, her hands sure on the reins, her eyes fixed ahead. Garrett watched her go sometimes, from where he stood mending a roof shingle or scraping moss from the edge of the well. One evening, after supper, she stood on the porch, sleeves rolled to her elbows, brushing dried mint into strips of cloth for the pantry shelves. Garrett stepped outside, the scent of smoke and warm earth clinging to his shirt. "You've made this place better," he said, voice low. She didn't glance up. "It's the season. Everything wants to come back." He leaned against the post. "Not everything does." She paused, then looked over at him. "I wasn't sure I could, not fully, but you did." "I think it's because no one asked me to be different," she said. "Just honest." Garrett stepped down from the porch and picked up the tin bucket she'd left by the steps. "Come with me," he said. She followed without question, winding through the trees behind the barn until they reached a clearing she hadn't seen before. The grass had just begun to push up from the thawed soil, and a rough fence circled the space in a wide arc. Inside it, a sapling stood planted in the center, staked with twine and a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt. "I started this grove years back," he said. "Figured I'd plant one tree for every winter I made it through." She stepped closer, fingertips brushing the young leaves. "This one's new." "I waited," he said. "Didn't know if I'd want to mark this winter like the others, but I do now." Her eyes found his. "Why now?" "Because I didn't just survive it, I came through it different." The wind moved through the branches, soft and low. Willa crouched near the base of the tree and pressed her palm to the dirt. "It's still fragile." "So was I," he said. She stood slowly and reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. Her grip was firm, not seeking steadiness but offering it. They walked back as the sky dimmed, the lantern in the cabin window already glowing. Inside, she lit the lamp on the table and untied the braid from her hair. Garrett hung his coat and sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the stone. "You ever miss the places you left behind?" she asked. "No," he said. "They all felt like waiting rooms." "This is the first place that's felt like it was meant for staying." She crossed the room and stood in front of him. "I used to think I was broken beyond mending." "You aren't. I know that now, but it took time." Garrett looked up at her, his eyes steady. "You've got all the time you want here." She nodded and knelt beside him. "I don't want it alone." He reached for her gently, cupping her face in his hand, his thumb brushing just beneath her cheekbone. "You won't be." Their kiss was quiet, more breath than motion, but it held all the truth neither of them had needed to say aloud. When they pulled back, she rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her like he'd known her shape for years. That night, they lay in the same bed for the first time. Not out of desperation, not out of need, but because neither of them wanted distance anymore. The fire burned low, and outside the wind carried the scent of thawed soil and pine. In the morning, she rose before the sun and came back with wild violets in her apron. She pressed them into a small glass jar and set it on the windowsill. He watched her from across the room, and when she turned, he said, "This house feels finished now." "It was never the house," she said. "It was what you filled it with." They built the rest of their life slowly, piece by piece. Willa started an herb garden behind the barn, and Garrett added a second corral for the spring calves. She stitched new curtains from a length of muslin he'd bartered for in town, and he carved a wooden shelf for her brooch box and the paper she sometimes wrote on, though she rarely mailed anything. She didn't need to anymore. When summer came, They rode to the ridge and looked out across the land. Willa leaned into Garrett's side, her fingers laced through his. "I used to think love had to be loud to be real," she said. "It doesn't. No, it just has to stay." And his hand tightened around hers. They never left the valley. They didn't need to. Their life stretched long and quiet, full of the kind of days that never made it into stories but filled a heart just the same. Chores done side by side, rain tapping on the roof, the shared look over morning coffee, still warm from the fire. Years later, a child's laugh echoed through the yard. Their daughter, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, chasing chickens in her woolen socks. Willa called her in for supper while Garrett lit the lamp. The house smelled of stew and rosemary, and the sunset turned the windows gold. Willa stood at the door and looked out across the fields, hand resting on her belly where another quiet life stirred. Garrett came up behind her and kissed her temple. "You still glad you stayed?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes soft. "I don't remember how to be anything else but home." And in that cabin, with the fire crackling low and the stars rising clean above the pines, they lived out their days in the simple, hard-earned joy of two people who had once been lost and found one another exactly as they were, and exactly when they needed to.